talk therapy is great, but I think there is a lot more that can happen, especially with trauma, that can heal parts of you without you even having to talk about what the trauma is.
Welcome back to season 4 of the podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. As many of you know, I wrote my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking. It's called Custom Justice, but if you didn't know, you do now. Keeping in line with that, this podcast has been dedicated to interviewing people who also wrote about their own experiences as trauma survivors and how they overcame the past. Stories of hope live here. Welcome back to the show. This week, I have a very special guest with me. This young lady has been through a crazy time, but she has overcome it, and she is a prolific writer, apparently. We were just talking a little bit before the show. I just want to welcome Elizabeth Cush to the show. Elizabeth, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well, other than feeling very disorganized, but I'm doing pretty well. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast, Amanda. Thank you.
Absolutely. A voice like yours needs to be heard. You have you have an amazing story. You've overcome so much. So let's start with who you were when you were little. Where did you grow up? Where are you originally from?
So I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, born and raised there. My dad was a physician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for a period of time. And yeah, grew up there and I'm one of four. So I'm the third of four siblings. Yeah.
Wow. And you're still kind of on the East Coast even now. Have you kind of stayed in the East Coast your whole
I
life?
have. Yeah. I went to the University of Delaware for a period of time, and then ended up living in Virginia for a few years, then moved to Maryland from there. So yeah, so I've lived in Delaware, excuse me, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania. Those are pretty much been my landing spots.
Nice. That's gorgeous out there on the East Coast. Yeah.
I do. I really enjoy being near the water, which is something that really just gives me a lot of fulfillment and joy and grounding. Is ocean, rivers, whatever it might be.
Oh, I love that. I love that. We need to be connected to water.
Yeah. It's good for my soul.
So now for the hard question.
Yes.
What was the trauma that changed the way that you were seeing the world?
Mm. So when I was very young, so probably 3 or 4, my grandfather sexually abused me, and it happened in what I would consider very public spaces. So it wasn't as if parents didn't know that it was happening. Adults didn't know it was happening, and in fact, that they were told it was happening. And for a lot of reasons that I can't necessarily speak to, but that I've come to understand, that it just the adults in my world didn't feel like they had the power or the ability to stop it from happening.
Man, that
And
that had to
yeah,
be rough.
yeah. And honestly, I think, yes, obviously the abuse was horrible and should never have happened, but
Right.
to the lack of response, the lack of agency, the lack of intervention, I think has been harder for me to understand how hard that was, and harder to sort of come back from and heal from.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I've heard it said so many times that a lot of people don't want to intervene because it means they have to acknowledge it's happening in the first place.
yeah, yeah. Well, for sure. Um, I think too at the time, I mean, you called me young in the introduction. Well, I'm 63,
You're
and
still young.
oh, I am young at heart for sure. But I think at that time, which was early 60s, when I was growing up, at least in my family, sort of the male presence had the power. There really wasn't even though things were changing, I feel like, and especially the dynamic in my family system was really like the man had the final say, the ultimate no or whatever, the ultimate decision making ability and power in the family. And I think that led to a lot of, fear on everybody else's part about like, well, what if we stand up to this guy and say, you got to quit doing this?
Yeah. Yeah. So, how did all of this impact your life? What changed within you because of this?
Well, I grew up being and I'm a highly sensitive person, so I am very attuned to other people's emotions. I tend to sort of take on other people's emotions, but it led me to being a very anxious, sometimes depressed little girl, but a young adult as well. And so I lived with a lot of anxiety for a long time until I realized the connection between the trauma and the unspoken emotions and feelings and the trauma itself. That all of that was kind of pushed down and not dealt with. And so it just ended up creating a very anxious part of me that I just thought was me for a long time.
Right. Right. What did you do to
Yeah.
be able to move beyond it, to start the healing process?
Well, a lot of healthy and unhealthy things. As a kid, I used to get stomach aches, so I would tell my mom I didn't feel good. I wouldn't want to go to school. When I got into high school, probably middle school, high school, I began sort of fooling around with, trying drinking alcohol or smoking pot, and none of those things really helped. Surprise, surprise. Um, um, but later, I remember in high school really feeling low and depressed and realized that I needed help outside of my family system and ended up getting into therapy at that point. And that was a huge turning point, although probably didn't last as long as it needed to. It was validation for me that what happened wasn't okay and that I don't even think then I made the connection between the anxiety and the trauma, but it gave me space to really fully understand how deeply it impacted me. Yeah, yeah.
In the
And I've
little,
been in and out of therapy for a long time, so that's been very helpful too as an adult.
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have any pets or anything growing up? Were they a part of your life to be able to help you to kind of cope with any of this stuff?
We've always had dogs, sometimes cats. Um, I would say as a kid, probably our dog Bandit was probably one of I used to like to train her to do tricks and stuff like that. Um, as an adult, yes, we've had two dachshunds who have been my little emotional support animals. So between client sessions, I go downstairs, hug my dog, take him for a walk, and he is a super anxious dog, so I have a lot of compassion for that.
Oh,
But
poor little puppy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But and in terms of like moving through as an adult, I think when I went back to school and recognized how deeply linked my anxiety and the depression I experienced as a younger adult and the trauma led me to really dive deeply into different forms of therapy and movement and yoga and um, meditation, which has helped a lot. Yeah,
Wow. That's fantastic.
yeah.
It's amazing how tough it can be when you start out on that healing journey, but how beautiful it can turn out to be.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I would encourage anybody who's like thinking they're too old, like it's never too late to start a healing journey. I mean, I think that um, I've been actively involved with a therapist over the last 2 years, I would say, year and a half, maybe. I don't even know. long enough time through internal family systems, or IFS, which is parts work. And so really connecting with those wounded parts of me that really never got a chance to heal. And that's been amazing. And here I am at 63, still finding new things about myself and new ways I can heal, which has been really beautiful.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
I love that you took the time to say what IFS is, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the acronyms or the terms. Yeah, and
yeah,
it's so important that people understand this stuff, that these are options that are available through therapy. It's not just all talk therapy. If somebody doesn't feel
yes,
that comfortable with it, there's
yeah,
alternatives available.
absolutely. And I think for some people, talk therapy is not the right. I mean,
Right.
I, you know, talk therapy is great, but I think there is a lot more that can happen, especially with trauma, that can heal parts of you without you even having to talk about what the trauma is.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm a big proponent for those things. The first therapist I had as an adult, I traumatized the poor woman so much with talk therapy that she ended up leaving the industry.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
It was rough. Yeah.
and you felt like it was your story that made her leave? I mean, she let you know this? No,
Um,
I hope
I
not.
was the only person that she was seeing at the time.
Oh, geez. I'm
So
sorry.
yeah, I very much felt like I was the person who did this and it was my fault. And I had to come to terms with that.
Oh
She
my
came into the
gosh.
industry and she decided that she wanted to help specific people, namely survivors of human trafficking. And she was not
Wow.
prepared for this.
Oh,
So
shit.
I can't own 100% of this. If she
No.
was not prepared, she should have been better prepared. Um,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was it was really hard on her. It was hard on me. But when she left, I
And
got the best therapist ever.
oh, good. I was going to say, I'm sorry that that happened. And yeah, as a therapist, you have to be ready to, you have to be in a place that you can hold whatever's coming, right? That you can hold the space, which is why I'm in therapy all the time, because I need it for myself to be the best therapist I can be for my clients.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love
Mm.
that this is what you're doing now. Did everything that you went through, is that what kind of propelled you towards what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, in many ways, yes. Did it happen quickly and unfold in a very neat and tidy way? Not so much. Um, I I dropped out of college probably when I was 21, and did not complete because family dynamic, not a lot of financial support or emotional support, and I was in a really bad abusive relationship, which didn't help my mental state. Ended up working and just stayed working for a long period of time. But when I had kids, I knew, when I began my mothering journey, I knew I wanted to be a different mother than, not that my mom was so terrible, but I knew I needed to do things differently for my children. And so I began reading books about child psychology, and that got me really interested. I think I took an introductory course through the community college in psychology, and I was like, oh, this is great. I want to do this. But it took a long time with having young children, our financial place, at my husband's and mine, and the time to really dedicate myself to school. So by the
Mm.
time I went back, I finished my undergrad degree around the age of 40, I would say, and then went back to school for my master's at 50 and graduated with that at 53. So I've been doing this for 10 years now.
Wow.
But Yeah, yeah. And initially was like, I'm going to work with kids. That's going to be my thing. I'm going to help abused kids. And I realized like I can't do that. Like
Yeah.
that's just too close. That's yeah, that was just too hard.
Yeah.
So I work with women primarily, with a lot of oftentimes highly sensitive women and women who have had attachment wounds, trauma. Um, yeah, that are working
Wow.
through that.
Yeah, I can see how working with kids would be like ripping off a band-aid and opening old wounds. That would be
Yeah,
really
and
hard.
yeah, and there's limited, yes, you can child therapists can do so much good, but if the family dynamic is not one where, they are safe and there's not much you can do about it. I mean, emotionally safe, like sure, we can call in child protective services or whatever, but like that felt just beyond my capacity to help in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually the same reason I did not become a police officer.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
As much as we all hate commercials, they are a necessary evil these days. That's what keeps the show on the air. You can show support by purchasing one of my mini books or donating through PayPal, or even just leaving a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. You can find the links for the books or donation options in the podcast description under the guest information. As always, a portion of the proceeds of everything made do go to local organizations that help fight human trafficking. Now back to the guest.
Yeah.
Now, I understand you have part of your blog that you would like to read for our audience.
Yes, good thing I found it, right? Yeah, so there was a period of time when I began to really unpack um, how much my trauma and the lack of agency in my family to make it stop impacted me. It really felt important to share my story in a more public way.
So I'm going to read from a blog post I wrote quite a few years ago, actually, when I began my sort of more public acceptance and sharing of the abuse I experienced and how it impacted me, because I felt it was important. If clients were going to work with me, I wanted them to know that I understood from where they were coming from, but also because I felt there was so much secrecy around what happened to me that I knew I needed to share more publicly about this, so I didn't feel like I was constantly holding something back. This comes from a blog post from January of 2019, A Story of Survival and Hearing, a Therapist's Journey into Seeing and Being. Throughout most of my life, anxiety has been a constant companion. As a young child, anxiety was a part of my emotional landscape, and it also inflected my physical world. I needed to feel that my body was safe and secure. I'd get my mom to tie the ribbons at the waist of my dresses so tightly that I could feel them cutting into my skin. I couldn't fall asleep at night unless the covers were tucked so tightly around me that I felt the pressure of the blankets pushing me into the bed. As a teenager, I often disconnected from my difficult feelings. I wasn't fully present, and it was as if I was in a fog. At other times, it was as if all the wires in my system fired at the same time. When I was stressed and anxious, I became hyper aware of my clothes touching my skin. Irritable and angry much of the time, I struggled with depression. All this confused me. I wasn't making the connection between the physical, sensory discomfort and my emotional discomfort. I felt like I didn't fit in. I believed that there was something wrong deep within me and that I was the problem. When I tried to fix that, I'd mold myself to other people's needs and agree to things I wasn't sure I wanted. My body would try to get my attention. A heavy tightness would press down on my chest. To this day, that pressure continues to remind me when I'm holding back and not speaking up for my wants and needs. It's not easy for me to open up, and it takes a lot for me to let my guard down, to be vulnerable, to trust, to be me. So much of that comes back to my childhood. The physical and emotional symptoms that I described didn't just crop up one day. When we were very young, I was abused by a powerful man in my family. The abuse was allowed to continue even after my sister and I came forward and told my parents. They consulted with the other adults in the family. It took a huge leap of faith to tell our story, but the adults we relied upon rationalized the abuse. and my sister and I were told to figure it out on our own. We were 4 and 6 years old. I can picture my younger self in a starchy, smocked, calico printed dress, chubby legs, a smile on my face, wanting to be loved, cared for. I just wanted to be seen, heard, and protected. Instead, the message I received was, "Don't make a fuss. Please go figure out how to protect yourself." As we grew older, the abuse stopped, but the emotional scars are still present, and they show themselves when I'm feeling most vulnerable. I know what it means to feel like no one sees you and no one hears you. I know the fear of showing my real self, and this is why I became a therapist, because I care so deeply about those who feel unseen and unheard. The abuse I experienced used to feel like a liability, but now I see it as my strength. I'm a better therapist because of my story, and I appreciate how it shaped me both personally and professionally. I'm not sure I'll ever rid myself of the need to protect me, or the worry that I'll show myself and there won't be anyone there to see me. But I've learned that I can be there for me. I am the one who will be able to see me, to hear me, to support me, and love me. Thank you for letting me read this part of my blog post and sharing my story.
So, Elizabeth, who inspires you the most?
Wow, that is a great question. I think that, well, I get inspired by my children every day. I have three grown young men, children, grown men, children, and they inspire me every day with their resilience and openness and creativity and humor. Um, but in my personal life or professionally, I guess I'm inspired by the people who are willing to step up and share their stories of healing and hurt. Um, I love I love reading memoirs, which to me, to read someone else's story of trauma and healing, even though it's hard, I just get so inspired by other women who are willing to come forward and be open and honest about how hard it can be, but how much joy can happen through healing. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. What a beautiful answer. I love that. Oh my gosh, that's exactly why I have this podcast, is because
Yeah.
I get so much from that. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, we've been through some rough stuff. We've been through some terrible things that never should have happened, but
yes.
we've overcome them. And now we're
Yeah,
using our own stories to be able to help others.
absolutely. And I think that to normalize, maybe that's the wrong word, validate that the tough stuff happens, that women can be and are vulnerable in ways that men are not. And not to say that men don't get abused. I know that they do. I totally get that. But um, yeah, I just want to validate that uh, I just feel how hard it can be. And I know that life can be good too.
Absolutely. Life can be fantastic with or without trauma in the background.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert? And have you always been that way, or have you changed?
I am definitely an introvert. And I think that I've become more introverted as I've grown older because I've learned to honor that introverted part of me that needs alone time, quiet time. And I think being introverted and highly sensitive, I need even more alone time and quiet time. And with COVID, I recognized how important that space was for me, just because I did spend a whole lot of time alone. Um, and it wasn't so terrible. I mean, it was hard, but it didn't knock me off track in a way I thought it would. Um, but I would say as an introvert, there are times that I need to really like prepare myself to be in around a lot of people or in a crowded situation, or especially when it's crowded and loud. That can be particularly hard for me.
Oh, same. And
Mm.
it wasn't always that way with me. When I was really little, I was absolutely an extrovert. I loved being around people.
Mm.
I fed off of that. I just ate it up. And now
Oh.
being around people just exhausts me.
Well, and to me, especially if it's a ton of small talk, just sort of chit chat
Oh,
versus like, let's talk about something important and deep and let's dive in, that I can do.
yep. Yep. Absolutely. Don't talk to me
Yeah.
about the weather. Let's talk about what happened last week with such and such. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Give me something real.
Give me something real for sure. Yeah.
So, my very favorite question always is the last question I ask. And I'm going to allow you to have the final word with this question. So, before I get to that, I am going to ask, do you have any words of encouragement that you'd like to share with people that are listening to this that have been through stuff?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that um, that I believe you. I hear you. I know that sometimes our stories of abuse get minimized or pushed under the rug or shoved away. But it's important to know that there are people that will listen and hear you and take your word as truth. And as I said before, like, healing is possible. I know for a long time I thought that I was damaged in a way that could never, ever heal, that there was something inside me that was broken. And I know now that that's not true, and that there were parts of me I just needed to attend to and take care of and listen to feel whole and healed and myself. And no, I just want others to know that that's possible.
Love that. And I may actually send this episode a little bit early over to my very best friend because she's going through some stuff
Mm,
right now with healing from a lot of trauma in her past. I think she could use the
yeah.
encouragement. So this is kind of special,
Mm,
a very
oh,
special time for me.
nice.
So, Elizabeth, my very last question, my very favorite one. What is one thing that you love about yourself that's not related to your physical appearance?
Mm, I think I love my ability to really fully see others with compassion and caring. That wasn't always the case, but I feel like um, I have worked really hard to become an open, caring, compassionate, kind human being in the world. And I am proud of myself in many ways. Am I perfect at it? No, but I do feel like I can meet people where they are.
If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please make sure you check out the episode description. You'll find links there on how you can learn more about this guest, links to connect with them on social media, and how to support the podcast. Remember, I don't get paid to do this. My boss is a bit tight fisted, but I can say that. I work for myself. In short, this show really is all about the guest. If you've enjoyed their interview, please feel free to let them know. You can also tune in to the other podcast, Growth from Darkness, which is co hosted by a lovely lady from Australia. We talk about what trauma responses are and healthy ways to move beyond the past. For more information, just go to growthfromdarkness.com.